All right, on that note, we will call this meeting of the Broker Responsibility Working Group to order. Before we get into remarks, Vanessa has a housekeeping item.
Good morning, everybody and everybody. So here we are, exciting hybrid scenario. So I just want to remind everyone of the usuals, what you guys always hear me say. Do speak up in this room, but it picks up pretty well.
Okay.
But I would project a little bit. And then for those of you who are virtual, per usual, you want to stay muted when you're not speaking. If you are speaking, then obviously unmute. You have you can feel free as a member to just chime in however you want to do it. There's also that raise hand function that looks like this. For us, it's in the. What's so funny for me in here, it's on the top of my screen, but on the Surface, it's on the bottom. So who knows? But it looks like this, and you can raise it, and then you'll want to unraise it, as I like to say. Don't forget, but you will forget. Don't worry about it.
Do that again. Do that again. It looked good when you put that L on your top of your head right there.
Thank you. I appreciated that. So there's that. Stay muted. If you are a member and can have your camera on, we ask that you do. We don't have any members of the public on the call itself. And finally, this is a little bit of a reminder for the next meeting. In terms of travel, and I'm going to do a better job of getting some emails out to the committees just as like a reminder of, hey, it's coming up and we got to book hotels and do all the travel stuff. I did not do that this time and I apologize for that. I will do that for the next one, but as a reminder, you'll really want to coordinate that with Amber because she has all the access codes and the logins and she can take care of it, but we want to give her enough time and we want to make sure that everybody's taken care of who is traveling and she can sort that with you. So I will send the reminder email, but I just want to go ahead and plant that seed. Planted.
Very good. All right, so we have quite a few things to discuss today. It's weird because it seems to me like it's been 6 months since the last meeting. And since even the last commission meeting where we presented our work from our last meeting, and it's only been 60 days or so. But all in all, I think we had a good discussion with the commission based on the stuff that we talked about when it came to both response times and the idea of the change to the 535.2 rule related to number of transactions, a number of types of brokerage activity that need to be supervised for somebody undertaking them for the first time.
And we're going to talk about that some more.
We are going to talk a little bit about that some more.
I'm trying to remember what we came up with.
Well, as a reminder of what we came up with, we currently the rule reads that somebody will supervise for the first time that someone, I hate to use the word incompetent, but not competent, in something that undertakes a brokerage activity for the first time. And our suggestion to the commission was the first 3 times.
Did they do anything with that?
We're going to get a report from that shortly. Hold that thought. Before we jump into the meat and potatoes here, we did have 3 comments from the public. Did everybody get a chance to look those over? Mm-hmm. They all kind of seem to gravitate around what we've been talking about and what we're going to talk about in just agenda item 6, which is Mr. Baker brought up at the last meeting, the distinction between broker, associate, delegated, supervisor, sponsoring broker, regular individual broker, those different kinds of differentiations of licenses that we see in some other states. And so we're going to have a conversation about that in item number 6. So before we jump into that, unless anybody has comment on those public comments, I think we either have covered or are going to cover today the majority of what those covered. The last thing that we kind of left hanging from the meeting we had last time was this ongoing discussion about property management. Mr. Warren and his comments. And so I'll let Vanessa take that.
Great.
And the update regarding ESAC.
Yeah, okay. So actually a year ago, we started talking about this. And we had comments from Mr. Warren about property management. This group has gone back and forth, had a lot of really good conversations, looked at some enforcement data, passed some stuff to ESAC. I'll cover that in a minute. I wanted to give a little bit of a summary of some of the things, and Mr. Warren had asked about this, some of the other ideas that had come out of this group. And I'll say that I think there's room for some recommendations. Taking a look at what comes out of ESAC might be helpful to see that before recommendations from this group to the extent you want to make some. But there's a little bit of a discussion about a separate IABS form for property management, or like a notice form. So the true IABS comes from statute. If you wanted, this group could recommend a statutory change for property management disclosure of that extent, though there's already a disclosure in there related to the duties of landlord-tenant. So not sure if that's something that you want to pick up and think about making that recommendation. We've got that consumer protection notice already. I think that, it seemed to me like the thought was a notice provision, and maybe that's something that you bat around a little bit more. But that, in terms of like the IABS, just in looking at it, it's got some language in there. Could be a legislative change to create something like that. The possible separate license / certification or designation. So TREC doesn't have any certifications or designations. That would be a new thing that this group could recommend if they wanted to. I mean, they could recommend a separate license to, I think you all know what I'm gonna say, in terms of you're creating a new license type and, higher levels, in terms of a new license, certification or designation. That would also require some new, as I'm thinking about it, the way you've spoken to me about it, that would require some,
We can't close the door.
No, you leave it open?
yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was gonna tell people to be quiet, but it looks like they're just passing through us.
So,
Doing nice.
I lost my chain.
I'm so sorry.
No.
Certification designation.
Oh yeah, certification designation. So TREC doesn't currently do any of those. I think one of the things you would want to think about, one is there's a potential for, I think the way I've heard you talk about it is there'd be some coursework associated with it, whether it's that property management course that ESAC's looking at, which is again another reason why I think maybe we circle back post ESAC's analysis of that course. But maybe there's room for that if this group wants to recommend it. The thing I would caution in certification or designation on the TREC end is, depending on what that looks like, that's a little bit of I'm not gonna say a TREC endorsement, but it's maybe packing a little more an unintentional punch than like to the consumer. Thinking, oh, this is a TREC certified, TREC designation, like this person's gotta be good. So like that's something you always wanna think about, right? And us as a licensing agency and what we do. And then there's the conversation about the checkbox, and I'm gonna say, I'm not done thinking about this. In terms of a checkbox that would be, because Chance brought up an idea of an internal checkbox, and that's, I will say, we're getting a new database system, so I don't see a checkbox coming into play yet to the extent one would come in, but he was talking more of an internal one, and we can get to that. But in terms of like an outward facing one of like, oh, this person does property management, you guys can certainly recommend it. My caution, and you guys know this is what I do, is again, what does that mean? And would that be Trek outwardly saying this person is qualified? When I don't know that we would have any, I don't wanna mislead folks into thinking, well, Trek says they're certified or they're, they do property management, they must be good, when we wouldn't know that, right? And then I'm just looking at do you have something, Ty?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what if it's just, and I get what you're saying too, because I can totally visualize a consumer saying, you know what, they must be good, if they're, licensed in this, it makes them feel like there's another license in there, I get what you're saying too. But what if we just said, if the broker said, hey, look, this is identifying the people that are authorized, maybe you just say they're authorized to do property management, maybe changing the lingo on it.
So,
That was kind of my thought on it, having like an internal checkbox, like a
Yeah.
delegated supervisor is.
Right,
They're authorized to do that
you're
activity.
just identifying the person, so that way we're not having rogue agents performing a duty that they're not supposed to do.
My concern on this has always been, whether it's checkboxes or whether it's, the conversations that happened years ago about license endorsement, almost like you have on your driver's license.
Right,
My concern has always been that yes, does that look like a public endorsement by the commission that this person is capable? But who the hell knows if they are, right? And the second thing is, it really becomes a slippery slope of, then what do we create endorsements for? And what is the broker responsibility on that? Because for instance, I don't know anything about property management. I'm not a property manager. I don't allow my agents to do property management, period. If all of a sudden we started saying, okay, checkbox this person's PM, then now what's my responsibility on competency for that?
right.
So I just,
that it would be without a box.
I think it's Pandora's box, potentially.
But wouldn't it be the same as if there wasn't a box? I mean, as a broker, it's our
If you're
responsibility.
undertaking that activity, yeah. That's just my,
For me,
if
as a
you're gonna do it, I
consumer,
like what you're talking
yeah,
about.
I think the way to do it is take the onus off of the commission. It's on the broker and you're identifying someone as that authorized party to do property management. I'm like Chance, I'm not gonna be doing any property management. After this, I guarantee you I'll never do property management.
But where are you
So-
putting that identifying information?
On,
Almost like a delegated supervisor
Yes.
checkbox.
Exactly.
So what happens if somebody transfers to your brokerage and they already have that on their little certifications,
Good
then
question.
is that coming back to you?
I
That's a
don't,
good question.
that's a good question. So what happens on the supervisor checkbox? Maybe y'all can tell us. I've never really
It
looked at
doesn't
that.
transfer. If they're a delegated supervisor at ABC Realty and they go to XYZ Realty, that checkbox.
Then that would be on the broker, right? So the broker would need to recertify that they believe that this person's capable of doing property management.
But does that come off of
I mean-
the TREC website as a designated?
30 days, you have 30 days.
Once,
When they have someone move from their office, or they're no longer a supervisor, is that correct? 30 days?
That's right.
and
30
it comes
days.
down from the website?
That's supposed to
If I-
be you, or when
if
they
I
no
can add-
longer are a delegated supervisor in your office. You got that time.
If I may add, to answer Leslie's question, this is Denise Sample, the licensing director. There is no automated removal of that flag. It is up to the new broker to clean up that record and make that change. And so what Bob Baker's referencing is the requirement of 30 days to make that designation and to make the change, but there's nothing in the system that automatically removes that flag if that sales agent changes brokers.
Oh, really?
So they're gonna stay as
So they
super,
stay a delegated supervisor if they're at ABC and they move to XYZ?
Yes,
up
until
until
the
the check
new
complaint
broker
and they go-
removes it.
Yes, and the investigator notices that, says, oh, by the way, look at all these teams you still have on your thing, you look at all these, they're no longer with you, what's going on there? It's like, no matter what tax advice you use, you're right, you can never get audited, so. If you ever have a track complaint, whatever you do. But I think it's worth considering, I don't know what's involved in having the system, well, there's no way for the system automatically to do it because you wouldn't know. Certainly if it was within the same.
And from an enforcement standpoint,
Yeah.
if you have checkboxes, it makes Mike's life a lot easier by saying, oh, you weren't authorized to do this activity.
But there's not,
What if you have to recertify that information, like from a drip kind of email every such and such amount of days or months or whatever?
that you're conducting, that
That
you're
you're
doing property management?
Or that you're still the designated supervisor of that company?
I think there's a big difference between designated
Yeah.
supervisor and property manager.
Right,
For
we're
sure.
just saying the
You know,
functionality.
one is supervising other agents. You know, we're all licensed as real estate agents, which basically, we're licensed to do any type of real estate activity, including property management, farm and ranch. And so the slippery slope that you're talking about, if we single out this one activity,
Right.
then are we gonna single out commercial real estate?
Maybe that
and
was
farm and
the
ranch
conversation that had
and-
happened with endorsements at one time.
Yeah, yeah. And so,
And for purposes of from the Trek standpoint of like what we need to license and enforce, which is what we do, that distinction is not something that, I'm looking at Mike, he doesn't know that, but that's not something that that we would utilize, right? Because you're always gonna go back to that broker agent relationship, like unless there's a new requirement to check that and there's something in there, just having that certification or whatever it's not gonna change anything from our end. Now, if you want a requirement that happens, then you get into a little bit of a different ballgame. I think it's something to think about. Like I said, we're getting a new database. I can't speak for IT though. I'm sure they would love it if I did. But we are in a transition period. So creating a whole new system and requirements right now, I'm not sure where that would go. I will circle it up with this. So ESAC met. They looked at all the comments. I sent them your discussions. I sent them Lee's comments, Lee's follow-up comments, everything. They got everything. And they have agreed to open up that 30-hour property management course, which, depending on any recommendations this group wants to make, I imagine includes that course in some form or fashion.
For sure.
So they're gonna open that up at the next meeting. So in this most recent meeting, they voted to open it up. They're gonna look at it. They're gonna look into how to maybe make it a more practical application course to the extent that's needed. But just really look at what's in that course. I know Mike's taken it recently. What's in that course and how could it be improved? I think it hasn't been looked at in a little bit. So that to me is probably the first tangible step in all of this. But this group can certainly, come up with official recommendations it wants to make on this.
I think what falls in our purview is broker responsibility, is what is the broker's responsibility for the agents that they sponsor. And their responsibility is to make sure that that agent is competent in the area that they practice, whether it's property management or farm and ranch or residential. And so what we might consider is just strengthening or refining that language about what is the broker's responsibility for supervising those agents as they want to pursue their various courses of action. I think Texas Realtors has done a good job in developing certifications for property management,
Right.
or farm and ranch,
Leasing
or,
specialists.
and so I think that's that association's responsibility, where our responsibility is making sure the broker is doing their job.
Mike, what do we have in the way of, like, how often are we getting complaints on unauthorized or incompetent property management?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this before. I mean, I brought some of that information to you guys a few meetings ago. It's gone down. I mean, you have a mix and mash of people. I mean, some people, regardless of the supervision, they're going to be a rogue agent. So I'm not sure that, the checkbox wouldn't necessarily matter a whole lot to me. I worry about people looking at it and seeing, oh, yeah, there's some sort of implied endorsement, or does that, imply that this person has a superior knowledge there? So, I have to treat basically all license holders the same in some circumstances, is like for knowledge based. I can mitigate the, type of punishment depending on how long they've been licensed, but
Thank you.
really, sorry.
Well, if my thought is, let's just say Chance, me and you are doing property management, and we say, you know what, we're gonna endorse somebody because we believe they're a great property manager, but we endorse them and say, we know they know what they're talking about, and we're putting our endorsement on them. Wouldn't that make it where brokers, I think the idea for me is, it's really identifying the person, but also putting the onus on the broker to make the right call and to make sure they put the right people in place and to hold them accountable. I'm less concerned about the person doing the property management. I'm more concerned about the broker actually being held accountable for their lack of supervision, and it goes back to the mentorship thing. But my point is that if you make the broker certify that that person should be or should not be doing property management, you're now saying we kind of pass the buck on, we're certifying that they know what they're doing and they should have the education and the wherewithal to be able to perform that duty. Otherwise, why am I certifying them?
So I would avoid the language of certification or endorsement, and I think that's what Vanessa's concerned about, the TREC endorsing or certifying them.
Acknowledging that they're capable of it then.
But if we're going to go down that path, then I would use the language of designation, because we've already used that. A broker designates this person as a supervisor, and that's the broker's responsibility. As a broker, could I designate this person as a property manager? And then it's my responsibility to make sure that they're competent and pursue the education and the endorsements through other.
But wouldn't that make sense though? If you said, hey, this guy or gal is good enough to do property management and they've just been violating everything from Sunday, at least Mike can go in and say, you know what? You did say that they knew what they were doing. You said that they had the education. You're supposed to be supervising them. Therefore, you're
And we can do that now.
Yes.
It already
Anytime-
exists, yeah.
Yeah, anytime
I think it just makes it easier, wouldn't it? Though?
I agree with you.
Well-
I think even though we can do it, it's just as a broker, when you're clicking on that, it's like a one more conscience
You're thinking
choice.
twice.
You're thinking it twice because you're going on the TREC website and clicking on somebody's name. So instead of just being like, oh yeah, go ahead and do it, I think you're good enough, you're gonna sit for a second and think like, okay, this person, I'm gonna have to go into the TREC and click on this button.
Right.
I get what you're saying, and
I
I
mean,
do
that's
think
for me,
it's.
it's like, I don't ever wanna have, I joke around about my office, or at my office about it, but I never wanna have any one of my agents ever show up at TREC.
Yeah.
Especially with me here. I don't want anything like that happening, because I want them to be, unless it's for a positive, you know what I mean? But I don't ever want it to happen, so that would make me think twice about what I'm doing as a broker, because I'm thinking about, you know what, could be real repercussions for me.
Even though it
And I
already
better make
is.
sure that I'm doing the right thing for my clients and my agents.
Effectively, or effectually, we, in our brokerage, we have designated 2 people as property managers.
Right.
And nobody else, no other agent, it's in our policies and procedures, no other agent can do property management. If we got that opportunity, it goes to these 2 people. They have been certified, they have gotten the education. And so putting that mechanism in place where I could go into TREC and say, okay, these are my designated property managers, that would be no problem. But I would consciously accept that responsibility.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
Can I clarify on some things here?
go for it.
I mean, all this, and I agree on the competency and responsibility. It's my opinion that we've done a great job in all the CE courses, especially broker responsibility, almost to the point of overemphasizing the responsibility of the broker in property management. I mean, we basically, the whole chapter in here, we should go through and go, it's the same thing in the CE course. And so from that standpoint, I think who really do a good job on whether or not it's designation, certification, whatever. And we had a little conversation about how the public perception is there. And I think this is a little bit of the competency issue that we talk about a lot. And I think it starts with how the public views someone who's licensed. Not just designation, certification, or whatever, but the license itself. And one of the battles that I think this group is facing, certainly I know that I'm facing and my agents are facing, is the competency issue. And the public continually, and we hear this from this area. So that's what you people do. That's how you are. They have a bad experience, you go through the process, rolls off on all of us. And so I think the perception of people saying, well, you got a real estate license, what's your point? What does that mean? It's the same thing with if we move in some direction, property management or anything else, we're going to have to accept that the public is going to have an enormous range of views about what that means. We have to accept that. We're going to decide on our points what we want to communicate. We probably can't go as strong as the attorneys do with their board certified designations, things of that nature. It's probably without, not in our purview, and legislature probably never does go down that road. But I think doing something that shows if you're going to do something, there needs to be some indication to the public that there's some education here, there's something involved. We'll never make it down to a different license for this and license for that. I think we've been killed by that. Although I think at some point, in maybe 20, 30 years from now, we'll work through something like that. But I think having some requirement from TREC saying if you're going to do certain things, and you talk about it as role responsibility, you've got to have some capability, some competency. One of the hardest things that we have to deal with, and I greatly respect what you just said. You don't ever want any of your agents to be a TREC. Unfortunately, I have had. And I go through that process. And it reminds me, as hard as I work to be a good broker, things happen. And that's just the nature of that beast, and you deal with it, and you move forward. But we're dealing with that situation of that competency. And the challenge is, it's one thing for, say, broker, you got to be competent. All your agents have to be competent. It's another thing when Mr. Malloy goes and the investigator says, okay, show me how you do that. Show me how you as the broker make sure your agents are competent. What's your process there? You got policy procedures, man, you got your contract agreement, you got your training. How do you really do that? There's never a good answer to that. And it's always, in my opinion, a work in progress. We're always going to be taking that next step and work through it. I like the idea of doing something in property management that as people are doing property management under however TREC wants to define that role. I think if we had something that indicated whatever we call it, endorsement, recommendation, they've done these courses, whatever, I think it's not a bad idea. Now, I do have an opinion about how many people are going to go to the TREC website and pull somebody's name up and see if they're a supervisor or a rock man. I think that's a pretty small number. But so I think this is primarily what we think and what TREC thinks. Here's the plus here. Here's the advantage of having done this, showing the public. Because who we're really working on here are the good brokers and the good people out there who are doing a good job. You're never going to fix stupid. We just got to work through and deal with that. So I think if we can create a system that shows the public, yeah, we're taking these things seriously. We're trying to do all we can do, both as commissioners working through the legislature and the various groups like us and ESAC and so forth. I think it's all we can do. I think we just need to decide if the concept is valid, then how we're going to say that's going to be, what's it going to be called on it. I think it's less important of all things. It's just the concept of saying, yeah, we need to do something. But I have no concerns about how good a job we're doing right now of making sure the broker understands how responsible they are. Property management is a great example, but in everything. We just, and I've never taught the broker responsibility course that I don't, when I teach it, and I've just been through it again, that I don't look at someone and say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing that. And then, okay, I need to make that change. Because it's always going to be one of those things. But I think we need to decide on, is the concept valid so that we can spend the time to work out how would we communicate to the public? Here's the concept, here's what it means. What we do to the brokers, say, here's what you need to do and here's what we're going to have to look to you to be responsible for. And that's just my thought of where we ought to go with that.
So we could take it, but yeah, please.
Sorry. So 2 quick notes on this, and I just want to go back to the rule if I can for a second. And then I want to comment, and maybe Robin can help as well on this, because I think there was an important development in the changes that TR published last Friday to some of their documentation that might inform this discussion a little bit. But if we're looking at the 535.2, I1 says it's a broker's responsibility to ensure that each sponsored sales agent is advised of the scope of the sales agent's authorized activities subject to the act, is competent to conduct such activities, including competence in geographic market where the sales agent represents clients. We could very easily, and not that everybody uses the TR documentation, but for the ones who do, it would automatically be in place. You could very easily suggest to the commission that that be amended to is advised of the scope of the sales agent's authorized activities in writing, right? And the new independent contractor agreement that published on Friday has a place for that.
That's right, it does.
So the new independent contractor agreement that published Friday has this is your authorized in writing scope of activities.
Chance, I think you could further strengthen that language. It says such as geographical competency.
Right.
You could also strengthen that with areas of practice such as property management,
Very true.
et cetera.
And we can just have it say in writing. And that way, if a complaint is lodged, Mike has something to go back on that is actually ruled.
If I can add just a little bit to that, and we'll take whatever direction that the committee goes to the commission with, and if that change is made, I have to tell you that the vast majority, in my experience of agents, don't have an independent contractor agreement with their brokers. The ones who need it. And so that's the first question that comes up on legal hotline is, what is your independent contract agreement?
Right.
Say, and they say, I don't have one. And
Wow.
so it goes back to the problem that I think that this work group always sees is, you have one set of brokers, and then you have the brokers who do it, the right way. And so, but we can certainly push that and will. I think we're going through the steps and making those changes, but just something to consider as far as incremental changes and moving forward.
You don't have any sort of numbers on that, like those that do, those that don't?
We don't.
No, okay.
And I'll say, Abby was just pointing out, that, there's already a requirement in the rule. So brokers required to notify a sponsored sales agent in writing of the scope of the agent's authorized activities under the act. And unless such scope is limited or revoked in writing, a broker is responsible for those authorized acts, right? And I think the part that you were citing, Chance, ties to that written policies and procedures. So that might be implied that it's part of, that it's gotta be in the writing. But I think the written requirements in there, I think we could look at it like this. I think we as staff can digest what's been said here and bring back, have an internal discussion about what does that look like? Is some sort of, I'm gonna say certification, but not like an actual certification, like a certification to track that, hey, these are by people that do property management. Now, I think James raises a good point on like Pandora's box. I wish he'd said Pandora's checkbox. But Pandora's box of like, well, if we're doing that for property management, why aren't we doing that for everyone? Do we want everyone to turn in all of the written scope of activities that every one of their people is doing? And like, what are we gonna do with that?
And what's wrong with that? I mean,
well,
and
I think from like a license, like we've got to think of it from the licensing agency standpoint, like what are we doing with that? Like that only comes up when Mike's knocking on your door.
Right.
And then Mike can say, hey, give me that documentation. Versus, it's info that's being sent here and, it won't be in a pile in a room because it'll be electronic. But I also see the point of what you're saying of like that step of saying, hey, Trek, I'm, check, Ty does property management for me, like that feels pretty real. So I can see that. So I think what we can do as staff is digest this conversation, look at it. Seems like this is sort of the one thing of the stuff I've mentioned that's still in this group merits more conversation discussion. So we can do that, we can put it on the agenda for the next one, because this isn't like a possible action item, so, but I think we can take that and come back with that. We'll look at, what ESAC's doing. I think one of the things they're gonna try to approach is not so much, I think we all agree, like, people are gonna do bad things, they're gonna do bad things, right? They're just gonna do it. They could take 100 classes on how to be a good person and they're still gonna do bad things. But I think one of the thoughts with ESAC, and I meant to mention this, is where can we find room in that course for the things that aren't intentionally bad? The negligence, the not knowing, those are the things that.
Unintentional property management of, I thought I was doing a favor.
Yeah.
I thought I was helping my client out, and all of a sudden you perform property management.
That's right, and so I think there's a click in that, like Chelsea always says, like, we can click, keep clicking forward, maybe it's there, maybe it's in some communications that we put out.
As we look at it, and something you said made me think of this. We were recently at a conference where someone in a different context said, stay in your lane, you'll stay out of trouble. And I have come back to that several times in that, Trek has a lane and the broker has a lane. And if it's the broker's lane to determine what someone is competent to do and to supervise that, then if they can do that, they stay out of trouble. I worry a little bit about Trek eking into that lane of broker supervision, because essentially if we were to designate a property manager, we would be doing that for the purposes of the broker properly supervising, right? It's the broker's responsibility, not ours. We would use the information for enforcement, but it's not our lane, right? Until we enforce. So just kind of peeling back the onion on that and seeing if there's a way to do that without getting ourselves in trouble or the broker in trouble.
And it's not the same for supervisor, for Trek, like what's the difference?
Statutory.
Because that's part of the licensing structure, right?
Okay.
You can do certain things.
Okay.
And I think, to Bob's point too, I think, members of the public are routinely going and looking at the website now. I wish they would. But I think we all know that people are going, like, agents are gonna use it. Oh, I've got this, you can look me up, I'm Trek certified me, you'll see there's a checkbox that says, I do property management, Trek's cool with, like, they'll use that as like a,
You'll be on a social media post within 5 minutes.
Yeah, I've seen you guys out there, you're always on. So just, why don't we, I think Chelsea raises some really good points, we can put this on the agenda as a possible recommendation for the next one that'll go in advance of the November meeting, which is always a good one to make the recommendations at. We'll digest that. I see all of the points, like I see there's something about, doing that and submitting that to your licensing agency that makes it a little bit more scary. But maybe there's messaging here, we've got a more powerful tool of messaging than we have. So let's see what ESAC does.
I don't necessarily also want to make it look like we're just picking on property management. It's just low-hanging fruit. And, it really is.
Well, it comes up all the time.
It comes up all the time, but we also have problems with residential agents getting into commercial. They have no business being in commercial. And the same thing holds true there, the residential agent, so, yeah.
I think Brian's right. Like, it's a bigger broker, like, what's the broker responsibility component? What are we looking at here? So, that is the update. Gosh, guys, I thought that was gonna be like a 5-minute update.
I know, right?
That was good.
No, it is good. And
By the way, I do go in and look at the website pretty regularly. Oh, I got an offer from an agent I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I look
Did
them
that
up.
yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Were they responding?
Disciplinary action?
As soon as you get a license, you are a certified stalker.
You can find disciplinary
Noted.
action on the website?
So Vanessa and I are stalkers without that license.
Okay, when we take a break, someone needs to show me.
It's on the
All right.
website, guys. It's very exciting.
Yes, it is.
So it just happened?
What is?
Yeah.
The disciplinary action.
Well, you could always do it, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
searching
I'm
it.
gonna do that.
Just go to a person's name and then.
First thing you do is put
Leave
on
that
license.
there.
We'll walk through it.
Look for your own.
This is, this will be like one of Leslie's legacies. Okay.
All right, so
Commissioner Leonard, so.
Yeah.
item number 5 is discussion and possible action regarding our 535.2 work responsibility rule and the rule that we proposed related to license holder response times. Ron, did you want to talk about that or no?
I had a comment to say if I could.
Go for it, my man.
I personally do believe, and I'm super happy that this is actually here on the agenda because, response times matters a lot, especially with license holders. Sometimes you just have a certain question about a property or something. Sometimes you can contact a single agent, they never get back to you. Sometimes clients are like, hey, what's going on? And then you look back to the client because the license holder isn't doing their job by, replying, or if there's any rule that can, basically have like a due diligence factor, like if you are listing this property, you should be answering questions about the property and answering your phone. So I'm very happy that that's there. And I also wanted to include another comment. So I'm actually very happy as well that you guys are discussing the mentorship thing because, like you said, competence is a big issue, especially in our field. When it comes to different sectors, if you've never done land, you shouldn't be doing land without a mentor. If you haven't done commercial, you should not be stepping there without a mentor because you need to make sure that the person that's basically supervising you, it has done it before and has done it frequently. So I'm actually very happy that both of these things are going to get discussed today. I think it'll serve us license holders, it'll benefit us in a lot of ways. And I do believe, because I mentor as well, that a lot of my mentees, they couldn't run around and do residential. So what makes them think that they can run around and do commercial? So but thanks for having me.
Awesome. No, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. Okay, so if you recall from the last meeting, we proposed to the commission to change I-5 in the 535.2 rule to go from supervision on the first time somebody does a type of real estate activity to the first 3 times that they do a type of real estate activity. So you can see both on screen and on the paper that Vanessa passed out the proposed language for transactional supervision. So in addition to completing statutory minimum continuing education requirements, each sponsored sales agent receives such additional education instruction the broker may deem necessary to obtain and maintain on a current basis competency in the scope of the sponsored sales agent's practice subject to the act. At a minimum, when a sales agent performs a type of real estate brokerage activity for the first 3 times, the broker must require that the sales agent receive coaching and assistance from an experienced license holder competent for that activity. So the 2 changes, obviously the first to 3, we talked about that. We went back and forth on numbers in the last meeting, but the clarification point was really the type of, because it was not just 3 times doing something. It was 3 times doing every single type of brokerage activity subject to the act. So whether that's leasing, whether that's, and you're representing a landlord, or it's leasing and you're representing a tenant, whether that's residential buyer, residential seller, commercial, farm and ranch, whatever, the first 3 times they're getting supervision from somebody who knows what the heck they're doing.
And I'll say, I think I'm gonna say this again on the next one. I think there's great opportunity to message this change to the extent it gets adopted. I will tell you, this we'll cover it a little bit later, but in the new broker responsibility course, there's a hypo that doesn't tie to the 3 times because it's not in effect yet, but that type of, to really clarify, but it will, right? That's actually a conversation we need to have. In terms of getting that done, but there's an example in there of you as a broker and this person, their dream has always been to do residential, and then they do that and they get the supervision, and then they're like, oh, a farm and ranch, I don't need any help, I got it, like, we're good, I did this thing, and like, what do you do in that scenario? What are your responsibilities? Like, what do you need to ensure? And then there's, how would you do it? So there's a lot of conversation, really hopeful with this book, in that area of competency and what does it look like and what is, what rules, how the rules apply to every single scenario. And I don't know, I think there's real room for us to push this message out, which will go, we talk about mentorship, and I see that in terms of, folks within organizations serving as the mentors, but truly going back to like, the broker is the ultimate mentor. That's the structure, you have that you have a mentorship structure, right? That's the broker-agent relationship, and I think pushing that on to saying, yeah, no, that's the broker. The broker's gotta do that. It's not this sort of nebulous like mentor. Yes, you can have people that you assign if you're not confident, et cetera. But at the end of the day, broker, mentor, do it. So I think there's room here. I'm if you all like it, you can, at the end of this, there's a vote. But that was there was a big conversation at the workshop about this. The clarification of type of came up. I think Commissioner Miller brought that up. So just giving you a little bit of summary. This was well received.
I like this. I mean, we've talked about it. It's not the perfect solution, and it's probably not the end of working on this, because it's probably never going to not be an issue. But I think that it's a good first step before you get into trying to, if there's some sort of formalized mentor type of program that the commission wants to undertake. I think this is a good first step in getting us, something to talk about in front of people, something to message from an education standpoint. I also, I would tie in that there has been some discussion on the ESAC group about in the pre-licensure talking about this, right? Like your broker should be mentoring you. Mm-hmm. Hint, hint, don't go to one that doesn't, right? Not actually outright saying that. But, and then I know we're also going to talk about the broker responsibility book, but as opposed to previous years where it was very heavily, this is the rule, this is the rule. In this book, these are the best practices. So yeah, it talks about the rule, but it also gives some like, maybe you should think about doing this because this is way smarter. And so, I'm hopeful for that book as well, because I think that it really gets people thinking. We have them, well, I'm getting into the next discussion point, but we literally have them stop and design a mentor program in the class. Like if you were building a mentor program from the ground up, here's your activity, go. What would that look like? And so, yeah, I think that this is a good start.
Each one of these things are just a click.
Yeah.
Or just
move the ball forward.
Yeah.
Could you clarify this for me? Is this something that's already been done?
No, sir. This is a proposed rule.
So we'll vote.
We're about to vote.
Yeah, we'll vote. I think we can vote since it's changes to the same rule. Let's go over response time before there's a vote, unless.
So are we talking about this change in I here?
The change in I-5, right. And so this would be vote, if this group votes to recommend the change, then we will take it, GCs will take it to the August meeting. Commission would vote. If they vote to approve to publish in the register, there'll be a comment period. Any comments will come back to this group in October, discussion, and then hopefully with adoption in November.
Okay, so if I can have some conversation about this, incredibly timely for me. I met with the leadership earlier this week and they knew I was going to be here at this meeting. And we're going through the process now dealing with our coaching requirements, our coaching program, which is a real challenge. We're primarily dealing with new agents, and we're having the conversation about how many transactions, how much time, which is going to vary a lot from agent to agent. And we're trying to work through that. And what we think we're kind of looking at is a process where the broker relies on the judgment of the coach to be able to release someone. Say, okay, you've done 3 or 5, or you've done 3, that's not enough, you need to do more. So is there some flexibility here for the broker to say, okay, I understand the minimum here is 3, but if we, on a particular agent, say, well, you know, you didn't get it yet,
I
so.
think it just sets a standard.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it sets a
absolutely. You
standard.
have your policies
A
and your
standard-
manuals.
It sets a standard and the broker has if
Yeah,
I'm
this is the
understanding
floor.
this right, it gives the broker the flexibility, this is the minimum, but I may require you to do 5, 10,
Right.
whatever.
Okay, which is.
So Bob, for example, in my brokerage, our coaching program, it's 5.
Okay,
So, and with very few exceptions. If they've been at a previous brokerage and they weren't getting support, and maybe they did 1 or 2 transactions there, we might lower it by 1. But very few exceptions to that rule, it's 5.
And it's the broker's discretion on if you
Whether
wanna
you
do
graduate or not.
10 or 20,
Exactly.
but this is the minimum.
so.
Yeah, I think the language allows
We've had some real-
that at a minimum.
We've had some real dummies that know
So I
5
go with
feet.
that. So now on to the next point, with raised coaching and assistance. So there doesn't actually have to be a formal coaching program, does there?
It's not.
If I've got an experienced agent who, like I've got an experienced agent right now who's helping 2 new agents go through the process and work through that, so that's within this system.
Correct.
And type of real estate, I mean, when they first get into business, whatever they first start doing, which is gonna be residential, that falls under that.
Yes, sir.
Right, but if they wanna switch then to.
So the idea here
To a new type of activity, then this applies.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So for example, you know, I've got a guy who heads our commercial division. If I've got a residential realtor who is wanting to get into commercial and start operating that activity, he's the one who coaches them through that. And he's a delegated supervisor in the brokerage to do that.
So this is gonna establish a minimum.
Minimum, just a floor.
Love it, that's great.
I think it's great.
All right, so do we want to vote on this separately, or do we want to vote it all together?
Are there 2 changes, one for the
There's
3
the
times
same rule,
mentorship?
2 types of
The other one is the
response
response times. I think it makes sense to vote on them separately.
All right.
Yeah, and because you've got a new rule on response time.
Okay, so as relates to the rule change to transactional supervision, the chair would entertain a motion to adopt.
That's no motion.
Wait a second.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Beautiful.
All right, second rule change, suggestion. If you recall from our last meeting, in 535.2 currently, a broker is required to respond to a sales agent, client, license holder representing other parties in a real estate transaction within 2 calendar days. But that only applies to somebody with a broker's license. We wanted to extend that to all licenses, right? You can't extend something to all licensees under 535.2 because that rule is only for brokers. So it had to go into another section, which is 535. And so the rule that the commission put together in their workshop was 535.157, obligation to respond timely, which says a broker or a sales agent must respond to their principal, a broker or sales agent representing other parties in a real estate transaction, or an unrepresented party in a real estate transaction within 2 calendar days. That then required a change to 535.2, which says in addition to the requirements of 535.157, which I just read, broker or supervisor delegated under subsection E of this section must respond to sponsored sales agents within 2 calendar days. And it takes the client's license holders representing other parties in real estate transaction out because that's covered in 535.157.
And we added that language, that was perfect.
Beautiful.
I need a beer.
Beautiful.
I may have to call on you during the meeting. So I will say, in conversations that we had, so at the workshop, the chair was concerned about pulling any responsibility out of the broker responsibility rule, which I get. But in terms of like the rulemaking component and what we're doing, it would be duplicative to have it in 2 places, and then people get confused and they're like, well, why, I didn't have to do it at all, right? So we had some conversations with him, went back to the drawing board, and we came up with this language of the in addition to the requirements, just to like, hey, there's another rule and it has requirements and you need to look at it. And it even, we even cite the relating to obligation to respond timely. So really, I think, put it out there that there's another rule that does this. And we talked to the chair about that, and he understood that, and he liked that direction of heading that way. So as Chance said, it'd be hard to obligate agents under a broker responsibility rule and feel like you're hiding it. So this I think covers it, but it keeps that the sponsored sales agents component in the broker responsibility rule, which really makes sense because that's what that rule is really getting to, is the scenario where you have folks that are under you.
So as I understand it, is that the first part of this is it's the broker's responsibility to respond to their agents.
Correct.
Agents got a question and they never hear from them. It's the broker's responsibility to respond to their agent. The second
It's
part
kind of a
is.
shame that we have to have such a rule.
Exactly. But I think it's appropriate.
Absolutely, 100%.
And the second portion here is all licensees must respond to other parties or unrepresented parties in a real estate transaction. So two separate things.
Two separate things.
Yes.
And we did add, that was a, thank you for bringing that up, Brian. The unrepresented party was a little bit of a loophole. I don't know if that's, loophole is not the right word, but it wasn't in there. I mean, it was used as a loophole, that's what you say. So we talked to the commission about that, and everyone was like, yeah.
Close the.
Of course, right?
Yeah,
And so that's where that unrepresented party language came in.
So just to nitpick it a little bit.
Yeah.
The phrase transaction. In my view, a transaction begins when a contract is executed. So do I have, as a broker or a licensee, do I have a responsibility under this rule to respond to an agent who has proffered an offer? Because there's not a transaction in my mind.
It's a really good question.
It's a good question.
It
This is soccer. I would say yes to that.
Action at the very beginning. You start to have a relationship.
I would say
I
when
don't think you have to have a contract to be in a transaction.
An offer is
Yeah, let's take the
But-
relationship.
But my concern is on this unrepresented party, it needs to be someone involved in some real estate activity with you, other than just, if you just get somebody who's just calling you out of the blue.
Right.
Hey, look, talk to me about the market. I think we gotta be careful how broad we make that, because then we're gonna have to respond to anybody and everybody.
Correct.
It has to be involved, and I think you're going in that direction of the transaction, some activity, something
Can
going on.
transaction be used as activity?
Is there anything in rule that defines transaction?
I don't think so, but
Because I can
feel
make
Abby's
the alternate
writing right
argument
now.
that if I'm a listing agent, my transaction began when I signed a listing agent.
If I'm a buyer's agent, my
Transaction
transaction
began when I signed a buyer's rep.
Activity does.
Yeah.
But if it's party to a real estate transaction?
That or an activity. I mean, activity is used throughout and it's.
Yeah, that's very broad, like activity. That's a good broad statement. Because as Brian points out, people have a different view about transaction.
Yeah, that's very.
Because you have a transaction coordinator once you have a contract, you don't have a transaction coordinator as you want for the offer.
I'm a marketing coordinator up to that.
Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
So activity, I think, creates a more defined, better term, because you have to respond
You
to
could use
somebody.
both, real estate activity or transaction. I mean, you could.
But if we're gonna do that, I would like her suggestion of not in a transaction, but to a transaction.
Party to.
Because
Two-way transaction, yeah,
to a transaction doesn't necessarily mean we're in a transaction,
Yeah,
that's right.
yep, I like that.
you know? To a transaction means I could be the offering agent,
I just want to make sure that, what
but you're right,
that's,
100%.
because that's the big complaint, right? Is I presented an offer and I never
You
hear.
got an answer,
Yeah.
yeah.
100%, agree.
So we're not gonna use activity,
The wheels are
we're gonna
turning,
use
hold on.
transaction.
Party.
No, that's what
to.
I'm at. That's what I was asking. Are you proposing activity, real estate brokerage activity over transaction?
Yes.
I like
Or-
activity better than transaction,
And are we
And
gonna say
then
party
party
to
to.
a real estate
a real estate
activity?
activity, party to a real estate activity. course, only if you don't like them. If you don't like them, you don't respond. I mean, come on, work.
Made me mad.
Oh, I'm
But
only.
it would have to be, all right, so I'm gonna pretend to be an attorney for a second. It would have to be activity under the act, right?
Brokerage
As
activity.
defined-
Abby's raising her hand.
As defined by the act.
Go for it, Abby.
Yeah.
And Mike has his hand raised too, so he's going off.
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm not with you right now. I've got a sick kiddo, but I'm just I'm hearing a little bit of this, and so just to clarify, so real estate brokerage activity is a defined term under the act, and it's activity for a broker or an agent. So I don't think it's as simple of a swap of changing real estate transaction to real estate brokerage activity. We'd have to do a little more finessing, if you will.
Is transaction defined?
Real estate transaction is not defined. It's currently what is in the rule 535.2. Is that J or I? Can't tell right now, but that's the current language used now.
So is Abby who puts in the direction of activity is the correct phrase here because of what she's saying?
No, that is
Or
not.
not?
That is not.
I think the services, real estate brokerage
Brokerage
services
activity
is
is what defines the acts that license holders can do. That all those things that broker, the definition of broker has that whole list of things that they can engage in. That's what we call real estate brokerage activity. So it's not just quite a simple swap out of those terms. That wouldn't quite make sense in how it's worded. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Were you saying transactions already in the rule?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. If you look in J, it says, client, it's got sponsored sales agents, clients, and license holders representing other parties in real estate transactions. So, our thought was, well, we'll just use that same language in this new rule.
And Mike, how do you all interpret that?
Keeping in mind, Mike, that the big question here is, if I make an offer on a property and you don't respond, have you violated this rule?
But, I mean, doing an offer that requires a license, so when I see transaction, that's potential transaction. I mean, that it may cover, I mean, when you use activity, it even gets more broad, in my opinion. Like real estate activities, I think that term is thrown around as well. I like brokerage activity, but that kind of corners in what I think your intent is as well. So I think last time when this problem was brought up, there was a mention about, we don't get a response from people on offers, and I think that was slide that they wanted, that was probably included into the intent of the purpose of this as well.
So do you think that as what's on the screen from an enforcement standpoint would cover that?
It's arguable, yeah. I would argue it.
We don't want to argue.
I want to argue with it, right?
We
Black and
white.
Perfect lawyer response.
I promise you, an agent who doesn't respond because you make an offer, say, well, we're not in transaction yet. They just made an offer. I don't have to respond.
What did she say the actual definition for activity was?
I think yeah, Abby, can you go over that one more time?
Sure. So real estate brokerage activity is a defined term in the Act, and it is all the things that license holders are authorized to do because they hold a license. So, and I may have misunderstood or misheard what the suggestion was, but if you simply say, if you swap out the term real estate transaction in 535.157 and say real estate brokerage activity, that doesn't really make sense because it's parties. So if you say as a broker or sales agent representing other parties in real estate brokerage activity, the parties aren't the ones engaging in the real estate brokerage activity, the broker or sales agent are. So I just wanted to raise that because it's not just quite a simple swap, if that was what the suggestion was. And I apologize if I misheard that.
No, I think you just said it really well.
Yeah.
That was like-
Okay, so
Very confused.
Abby, as to what's on the screen, for 535.157, we said a broker or sales agent must respond to their principal, a broker or sales agent representing other parties in a real estate brokerage activity, or an unrepresented party in a real estate transaction. Wouldn't that cover us there?
I
What we're
think you're
trying to do
still,
here?
I think you still run into that issue if you, because we're saying in two places, you know, party or parties in a real estate transaction. So the parties aren't engaging in brokerage activity. They are part of a real estate transaction. So I don't think you can swap that term with the real estate brokerage activity without doing some more, some other changes as well to the rule.
So we would need to say, a broker or sales agent must respond to their principal, a broker or sales agent,
What about performing brokerage
Performing-
activity or brokerage
yeah,
services?
performing brokerage activity.
I think in
Or
the
an unrepresented party.
IADS form, I think activities and services are interchanged, you know, so information about brokerage services, and then it says a broker is responsible for all brokerage activities. So I think those two are interchangeable. I think what they're saying here is strike in a real estate transaction. So it must respond to the broker, sales agent representing other parties, strike in a real estate transaction,
What about
or an unrepresented party in a strike in a real estate transaction.
Can I ask just a clarifying question? Is the concern that real estate transaction, it's not clear whether that includes the offer part of a real estate transaction?
That's the question.
That's the concern.
Okay, so I think there's a couple options we would have there, and Vanessa and I and Mike, we can take that back. But we could, you know, provide a definition of real estate transaction. We could say something like, and this would be really wordy, so we'd probably try to clean it up a little bit, but you know, either do a definition of what real estate transaction means, or we could say, you know, in a real estate transaction, including, you know, an offer or something to make clear in the rule that offers are included. We can play around with that, but if that's the concern, I think we can probably play around with the language a little bit.
When we look at all the forms that TREC requires us in that long list, 535, offers is part of that. So as we receive offers back and forth, that's something that we've got to keep those records. So that offering process is clearly one of the requirements that TREC has.
I almost think, I feel like it's already included in there.
Hey, Abby,
Yeah.
I'm doing my scratch pad lawyering here.
Yes.
So what if we said something along the lines of a broker or sales agent must respond to their principal, a broker or sales agent engaged in brokerage activity on behalf of a principal or an unrepresented party in a real estate transaction within 2 calendar days?
Take out the unrepresented party in a real estate transaction, just take out the.
I would say in the real estate transaction still, but I would leave that part, I would leave the unrepresented party part alone and just say principal or broker or sales agent engaged in brokerage activity on behalf of a principal.
Sitting here, I think that probably works. Vanessa knows this. I always like to sit and stare quietly at things. So in order to come, you know, come to a conclusion, but like a weirdo. But I think that sounds okay. Just, you know, thinking about it right now.
Okay, what if we do this, Abby? What if I send this to you right now? We stop, maybe
Come
take
back.
a break, like a 10-minute break, and then we'll see if Abby's had quiet time. Yeah, or we can pick up we can pause this agenda item and come back to it. Because I think we really want to leave here
Yes.
with a recommendation. I also like I liked that definition idea as well.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
So, Abby, I'm gonna
Specifically
send
include
you Chance's language.
Okay. Great.
Does that give you enough quietly staring time?
I think so.
Well, also it's gonna go, I mean, it's gonna go for proposal, there's comment period, there's
There's gonna
still,
be change.
there's room for
Yeah.
adjustment, so long as, and it wouldn't be, this would not be such a substantive change to the extent we tinker with it that it would need a re-proposal from what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
But let's maybe, I mean, I'm not calling the break, sorry, Chance, but I'm just trying to give Abby some time.
It's 10 minutes.
Bill? Oh, Bill, yeah, Bill's.
Oh, Bill, I'm sorry. My apologies, sir.
My recommendation was that we leave the word transaction. I think transaction is very broad. I think it allows the flexibility for a meaningful and substantial discussion between people. And that's what you're trying to do, is make sure people respond to something that's important. A transaction involves the contact of people. It involves the offers. It involves the discussion. It involves exchanging papers. I think transaction is a very good, and it's a commonly used word. I think it's understood that it's involved in a process. I think if you start defining it, you're going to get into a danger when you start figuring out what that means. I think we're going to end up with a very difficult situation. And I think the way that it's written is understandable by the majority of people, and I think it's enforceable. And if there's a technical issue of whether it was a transaction or not, in that one case out of a million, when somebody's going to argue about it, I think it can be resolved. But my recommendation is don't over lawyer it. Transaction's a good word, and we should leave it in there and let it go.
Thank you, sir. All right, it's 11:12. Be back at 11:25. Take a break. Everybody good with that? All right, I'll break.
Deal with.
All right, everybody, we're going to come back together. And while Vanessa and Abby are busy lawyering in the other room, we're going to move forward to discussion point number 6. And we'll come back to discussion point 5 on the agenda once we have kind of a resolution there, and they've stared at things. So discussion point number 6 was a discussion regarding the distinction between a broker, sponsoring broker, designated broker, and possible changes to related requirements. Mr. Baker, I'm going to let you kind of take the floor on this one because you were the one who brought it up, and you were the one who was part of the discussion in the last broker responsibility working group.
Okay.
That really kind of dove into this topic.
Thank you. And we all read the supplement guy that Kelly sent in.
Yes.
He was on the previous broker responsibility working group, and he was kind of he was broker out of Laredo, very sharp. We had that discussion then, and first was everyone agreed that there needs to be some kind of a distinction between someone who is a sponsoring broker and somebody who is just a broker. And right now, the rule is we all understand, we've got the requirements that you have to go through to be a broker, which in spite of what the legislature thinks is still pretty minimal. And you get a broker's license, and the next day you can hire 100 agents. And you're now responsible, Drake's a whole responsible like that, but we've got agents sitting out there who are clueless, worse than what we got right now, because there's nothing that says that person who's a sponsoring broker has to have anything more and different than if you're just a broker. I think that's wrong. I mean, I just think that if you're going to be a sponsoring broker, there needs to be a different level of accountability. Well, my brokers are responsible. It's a different world than somebody who's their own broker and their own company, their own sole proprietor, whatever, than somebody who's got 10 agents or 100 agents or whatever. In my opinion, that's a different level of responsibility, and we've got to say to that person, if you're going to do this, if you're going to take on agents, yeah, I know, we got 535.2, Bob, I've read it, I understand, I've got to be responsible, I understand all that. Yeah, but what have you done to make sure that you can be responsible, that you can be competent? Some way, shape, or form. I mean, we all understand the concepts of it, and it's just my whole thing is, I think that, and I understand it probably will be a big battle with the legislature, I don't know. But I think this group, broker responsibility, we need to have some distinction between what do we mean by broker. If you're a sponsoring broker, is that a different thing? And I think it is, and I certainly am open to somebody saying, no, it's not a big deal, Bob. I mean, but every day my agent, I've got one right now, And I just had our conversation a little bit earlier, and having a real problem with the agent on the other side. I say, well, okay, who's their broker? Well, they are the broker.
Yeah.
Where do we go then?
All day, every day.
And the reality, it happens all, and there's no extra thing that person had to do. And I understand that. I didn't have to do anything except take a test when I became a broker way back when. It was some little play tablets is what it was. A long time ago. But I don't know what the piece, first I want to make sure that in some way, shape or form, we're on board with the concept. And then as we look to our people says, well, okay, here's how hard that's going to be and here's what we have to do to make that work. And then look at the specifics of it. And we're going to rely on Trek to be able to say, okay, as you make recommendations, here are your obstacles. Here's the thing. And I'm respectful of that. Now, being respectful of it doesn't make it, that's going to be hard, doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Shouldn't try to do it. Shouldn't make some progress in that direction. I just think it's too important somehow. So,
Bob, in y'all's discussions in the last group, did y'all discuss qualifications
yes,
too?
As a matter of fact, and we sent recommendations to the commission, and unfortunately, there was something else that went to the commission at the same time from the Sunset Commission, and
Right.
everything that we did was just went out the door because everything was focused on the Sunset Commission. And we talked about timelines, and we talked about additional education, a 2-year period. And somewhere in the paperwork in there, those things that were sent from the previous work group should have come across and went to the commissioners. So we should have that somewhere, and I probably even have it back in my paperwork. I assume pull it out.
I imagine we have it.
I was gonna say, we can get a copy of those.
But our focus was on, there's an education requirement that you have to go through to be able to do that. And as I recall, it was done within that 2-year time frame. They would work through it.
So something like an SAE, but for brokers?
Yeah, except for sponsors, specifically sponsoring brokers. And we really were making that distinction, that if you're gonna be a sponsoring broker now, I don't know that we got enough feedback from the powers that be at that time, which are obviously a different group, on what has to happen at the Trek level from a license or education level, as Ms. Wheeler would have to address and deal with as we work through that. And she may even remember some of what we, Jennifer may remember some of the things that we sent through on that. But I don't know how we go through the process on Trek's website, that if somebody's gonna be a broker, we make a distinction between you're a broker or you're a sponsoring broker. But clearly, something of that nature has to be done. But my first whole thing is, I want us to have some buy-in to the concept. But yeah, we want to see what we can do about making some distinction between broker versus sponsoring broker.
What do you think about the broker's responsibility course that's required? You don't think that kind of suffices?
I don't know. I don't think it's enough. And we didn't either. We thought there had to be additional. While that course is really good, showing here's, and the focus of that course really is not just if you're a broker, because if you're a broker and you don't sponsoring agents or an entity, you don't have to take the course. But if you're a sponsoring broker, I mean, that's the emphasis of that course on that. So it does a good job in that direction, but there needs to be something in addition to that, because you can take that course, you know, and you take that course and take the brokerage course, like it's your broker's license and go out and, you know, hire a bunch of agents.
When you say that course, are you?
The broker's
Those 30-hour.
I'm an associate broker. I'm not sponsoring the agents, but I am required to take that course.
Well,
every lesson period.
if you supervise agents, you're not required to take it.
Well,
If you
yeah, I'm a
don't supervise
designated
agents.
supervisor.
If you're not a designated supervisor in your firm, you're not required to take it.
I do know it's been discussed of having broker responsibility for all. That's been a discussion in the
Yeah.
past. But are you recommending more experience? Are you recommending a new course? What are you recommending?
Both, both an education and a different education than the broker responsibility course. And you have to go through a different experience level for a sponsoring broker over that 2-year period. We use a 2-year period as the last year goal every time, right?
Jennifer, did you want to jump in on some of the past discussion on this?
Well, yeah, thank you, Chair. Bob, I understand, just to clarify, I think what you're talking about is TREC identifying a distinction between the sponsoring broker and traditional loan broker, meaning LONE, not LOAN.
Good distinction.
And yeah, I do recall some of those conversations. I don't think I have access to the materials from back at that time. It may take me a little while to look for them, but I did just want to add to the conversation that this topic has been a topic that has also been discussed at the ESAC level. And just for some context, ESAC just recently recommended changes to the 30-hour real estate brokerage course to really dig deeper into the responsibilities of the sales agent and broker relationship, one to another, expectations as well. So I just want this group to know that there's one, like Chelsea would say, click that is being pushed forward to the commission in terms of understanding and responsibilities. But again, I understand that this is a little bit different of a discussion. I just want you to have that information.
Thank you.
So my thought would be, as we try to move forward, is one, see whether or not we agree on the concept of trying to make some distinction, and then how we would do that, and whether it's in the line of certain courses. You've got to be a broker for a certain period of time, have a broker's license, have a certain period of time before you become a sponsoring broker. It can't be an overnight thing. You know, those are some of the things that we've got to talk about and address, and see if it's an experience plus an education and what type of education. I'm glad to hear that ESAC talked about changes in the brokerage course, because that's obviously one of the requirements that you have to get to be a broker. They're talking about that relationship. And so as you brought up, I know we've talked for some time about everyone should have to take broker responsibility course, not just brokers, but everyone, agents and whatever. I think it would be a great thing to do as you work through it. But I think trying to decide what would really, if we say, yeah, it is a different thing, what would really help someone who is a broker, and we can only deal with the good people. The others, I can't do anything about, I'm sorry. But the good people say, yeah, I'm a broker, I want to be a sponsoring broker. What does that mean? What should I know? What should I be able to do? What kind of process do I have to go through? Not just what are the minimum requirements, but we want to have something that helps that person who's now going to take on and have agents and be responsible for them. What's going to help them do that? What kind of education is it? Is it ESAC coming up with a whole different course? Is it something, for lack of a better word, a sponsoring broker class or something like that you do? But I think there needs to be something that helps the good people who say, yeah, I want to start my own company, and I understand that's a different level of responsibility. So help me understand what that is, and help me understand what I need to do. Now, the easy thing, it was just pointed out, so well, do everything that's in 535.2, and now 535.1. Do everything that's in the broker responsibility course. Well, at some level, it kind of semi-solves it, because that course is very good at helping brokers understand, here's what you have to be responsible for.
But they're changing it, right? Like that course is gonna be a little more like on kind of what he's talking about, the mentorship,
It does talk about that. Yeah, I mean, it changes, but it changes every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a worthy conversation for the group. I think it's timely, you know, especially with what ESAC is doing in education, some discussions about mentorship. I know when the requirements become a broker, you can earn points for supervising other agents, but it's not a requirement, you know, and so I think that that type of experience would be, requiring that type of experience in order to sponsor other agents would be a worthy discussion.
So can I go real quickly? Does everybody think that this warrants further discussion? Because what I'd like to do, if y'all think that is the case, is ask Vanessa to go back in the Wayback Machine and pull the archives of the last broker responsibility working group and what their discussions look like. So we have a little more informed conversation. Would y'all be, and then we just do that at the next meeting. Would y'all be okay with that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth looking at.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. If everybody agrees, then let's go that road, and we'll just have a more in-depth conversation. and we have a little more context.
We'll make it a discussion and possible action item too, just in case there's recommendations that come out that one.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time. I would like to add a point for further discussion as well. Maybe it's later.
It is later.
Okay.
Unless it's related to this.
It's similar, but I don't think it's related, so let's
Okay.
talk about it.
All right, cool. Very good. All right, do we want to go back to 5 or do we want to go forward to 7? Abby, have you stared?
Oh, yeah, she stared and talked. So, while we were on break, Abby, Mike, and I got together and had a call. And Abby can go a little bit more into some of the details in terms of how, there's potential for brokerage activity to actually be a little bit more limiting. And going back, Mike was talking about this too, the origins of this rule really seem to relate to like a current, I'm gonna say transaction. A current transaction, right? So, hey, we put in an offer, I've called 7 times, no one's called me back, or, whatever that scenario is. And that potentially using brokerage activity in the way it's defined could actually be a little bit limiting. We use transaction now. It is TREC's rule. So TREC gets to interpret it and define it. There was some discussion about maybe what we could do here is put in some clarifying language in this rule language saying real estate transaction includes offer. I'll turn it over to Abby a little bit in that regard. I want to say, I think I said it earlier, we still have room to work on this in October on the specific language. So what we walk out with today may not be what eventually goes, but I think I would never want you guys to recommend something that you're not comfortable with, but just remember there is that public comment. There's still some time to massage a little bit and let us think on like the full ramifications of what these language changes would mean. But Abby, did you want to add anything to that?
I actually don't have anything. That was great. So I don't have anything else to add unless there are questions.
Okay.
Do you like the idea of adding that, including like an offer? So it would, no, I see Bill saying no.
I don't necessarily know that if we're gonna interpret it as an offer as part of the transaction, I don't think we need to.
Yeah, leave it as all encompassing then.
And we can I always just speak to Summer at all times of like, we can message this, and really get out, what this, what TREC's stance is. And I think this rule has a lot of strength in terms, one of the examples the chair brought up was, wow, what a great tool for any broker or agent to have of like, did you know that TREC rule requires you to respond within 2, so I think, I'm excited for that, but I think we can also message it, right? Like when we push this out.
How's enforcement gonna interpret it when something comes to them, is the question.
Message is one way, they'd have to interpret it that way.
Yeah, I think we can, well, that's true, however we message it is true. I know, right now they've got it, I don't know how often it comes up. I'm looking at Mike on my laptop as I say that.
I think it'll come up a lot more. If this is.
It doesn't come up very often.
Sure, Mike's gonna see my
Did y'all hear that?
name.
Mike said that for the broker rule, it doesn't come up very often.
Yeah.
But we would broadly, I've been party to this, we know the intent of overall the everyone here and the commission probably is to include offers, just generally speaking. And like Vanessa said, it's our rule, we can interpret it as we have. I mean, if someone really challenges us on it, then, that's that may happen, but I don't foresee it necessarily.
What about adding the the additional language you,
They said no. Yeah. So the consensus seems to be leave it as it is, put it before the commission and let them make changes and or through the comment process, make changes. And come back to it in October.
can we just change that unrepresented party to a real estate transaction instead of in a real estate transaction?
I'm okay with that change,
Because
but
it's a little more broad, that
Yeah.
the party, if it's in, it's, you're talking
Yeah,
about
I do like to.
like in contract.
is that gonna narrow it? I'm looking at Abby on here, so the question is, are an unrepresented party to a real estate transaction versus in? I think it's okay, I don't know that that's gonna limit it, but I know I'm asking again, we're doing the thing again, that Abby's always like, please don't do that to me.
I think that's probably okay. We have in right now. I'm not sure that it matters too much, but I guess I would be consistent across.
I think the concern with in versus to is in could be interpreted as we have an executed contract. Where to would be potential offers.
I think that let's if the group likes that language of two, let's float it and think about it.
Okay.
But that requires, I'll shut up and you do your thing.
All right, if everybody's good with this, Chair would entertain a vote to accept it as.
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. All right. Moving on to number 7. Good job, everyone. Way to go. Moving on to number 7, update regarding the broker responsibility workbook that we've talked about already all through the meeting. So,
Commissioner Russell's got her hand up.
oh, Commissioner Russell, sorry.
You're seeing some raised hands of people that want to comment. Just wanted to call that to your attention. They just pulled it down, but are you hearing me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. We're
Okay.
not seeing any current hand raise.
No, it was pulled down. Just, you might keep an eye on it.
Okay.
That's all.
So Bill, did you have anything you wanted to say? No, he says no.
Okay. All right, so you wanna lead or you want me to lead?
I have 1 second.
Go for 1
I'm
second.
trying to send Chair Kelsner the link for this meeting.
Oh, let me do that.
Okay, perfect.
Come on in.
Okay, so what about, so to be clear on the vote that we just had, that was a vote to move forward on the changes that we have in this draft, in the draft document of response time.
Correct.
So that would encompass the 535.2 and the 535.157
Correct.
with the changes that we discussed.
Correct.
Okay, broker responsibility course,
Yeah.
the greatest book that's ever been written. Single-handedly done by Chance and Vanessa. So we've talked a little bit about this kind of throughout, keeping you guys updated, just because I think we can utilize this book to address a lot of the concerns, and we're gonna use that click example again. So it's almost in final format. It's pretty close. There's a meeting in 2 days to go over the last review. I think what you'll see, and Bob, this may, it will not fix your concerns, but it's a step towards it. There's, again, that real focus on, that we're trying to have like really engaged activities and really focus on not just like, these are the rules and you need to know them in terms of like, we're teaching you what the rules are, but we're really focused on that supervising, sponsoring relationship of, there are advertising rules, you should know them. How are you going to handle that with your agents? Like what are you going to do? What do they need to have? How can you focus on you know, how do you address, I don't know how you address, like practically speaking, it seems hard to address the social media posts in a lot of ways because they're just, like I said earlier, they're constant, right? But those conversations, looking at, we've got a section on like one rule, all, right? You're held to Trek rules regardless of if you've got one person or 1,000 people, and what, maybe that looks different for you, and let's talk about what does that look like in those different scenarios. And then there's a lot, like Chan said, we've got the mentoring, there's a big section on contract form competency, which I know is, you know, that's on everyone's minds. So I'm hopeful that instead of it, we've turned it a little bit just from that, you know, we're gonna teach you the rules you need to know, because I think the expectation is you know those rules. What does it mean for you as a broker when you have agents, or as a supervisor when you have agents? What are you doing to ensure that responsibility component versus knowing the rules, which again, I would really like for everyone to know the rules.
Well, and I think one of the things that I like about it too is that there's a lot of practical application, like not only how do you do this in the real world, but this is what it should actually look like. So when we talk about agents not knowing where to post the IABS and CPN in their social media, we're gonna have actual screenshots of this is what this should look like. So they'll be able to see that, and brokers can then relay that to their agents. And I think, you know, one thing to add is the appendix has always been something that's just kind of been skipped over, and it's where like role plays were and scripting for those kinds of things. And what we really tried to do with this book is create the appendix that it's a usable reference tool that you can keep and go back to. And it has like real practical information, real practical best practices, things like that that you can actually use in your business. You know, I was just gonna, we've got the introduction, which is the typical who's gonna take this and all of that. But really it talks about, this is what the rule says. This is broker responsibility in rule and what it looks like in real life, and try to bring that to life. And then we go into delegated supervisors and teams. And then really chapter 3, I think, is the one that we've allotted almost 2 hours for teaching just one chapter, and that is the competency and training part. And like I said earlier, like we actually have them break out into a group where they're going to design, these are the elements of what a mentorship program, whether you're a team leader or a broker, ought to look like for agents. And so really kind of get into, you know, getting their hands dirty on thinking about this stuff, right? Then we talk about practical application of required documentation, other stuff like advertising rules, DBAs, succession planning, which I've been pushing for that for like 5 years, so I'm really excited to see it in there, because there's there's an aging population of brokers, and we have had real things where somebody's died and all of a sudden all their contracts and all their ICAs and everything die with them, and everybody's scrambling at the last second. And then kind of the walk through how to raise the bar.
And enforcement, we walk through that enforcement. Like, what does enforcement look like, and what happens if your agent gets a complaint? All that kind of stuff.
So enforcement on a Trek level.
The Trek enforcement level. One, to just explain what that process looks like, but two, to be like, hey, you know, I'm not gonna say we're coming for you, but that's, you know, if you're, well, to the extent, like, if your agent has a complaint, like, get ready, and what can you do to, you know, have the documentation that you need in place? You know, how do you approach those situations? There's a little bit of a discussion on broker to broker, right? We hear that a lot. Well, I just, you know, the practice is, let's stay out of Trek and let's call the broker. So we know that happens. What does that look like? What do you do when you've got somebody who's calling you, you know, yelling your agent, you know, blew up this whole deal and this is a nightmare, and just really trying to get some more practical application. I hope it's great, but we just wanted to keep you guys updated on what it's looking like.
I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, in our earlier discussions, we've had conversation about it's difficult, or I don't think our licensees know how to file a complaint. And so maybe that enforcement section.
But there's a section in here called file a complaint with an exclamation point. Because we're like, hey,
How,
here's,
what are the steps?
nothing changes
What
unless
are
you
the
file a
steps?
complaint and it actually walks through that piece of the puzzle.
I will say, if we're going to like what the appraisers have, that's so much easier.
Yes, the online,
Mhm.
yeah. I
So
think,
much easier.
I believe that is
The
happening.
appraiser complaint
Mhm.
process is all online, and so you kind of just upload and kind of, it's very streamlined, and it was so much easier.
So,
Good. Good
That I
stuff.
think.
for those of us who are, yes, sir, Mr. Baker.
So this sounds like this could be an important element as we look at broker versus sponsoring broker. This could be something that could be an important, not what you do to become a sponsoring broker, but here's a big part of what's your responsibility to work through that. I would be interested to see the degree to which Mike in enforcement had some input into the things you're talking about doing. Because if you're having all these things that we're now teaching brokers to do, is enforcement on board with all that, what's involved, as those complaints come through?
He's been on every single call.
Perfect,
Yeah.
okay. And so that broker to broker
As
thing,
Vanessa has chastised
are
him
you
openly in every
in any
call.
way discouraging that?
No, I don't think there's a reason. What it says is, okay, you have a scenario where a broker calls you upset at whatever, okay, do you walk through that, you talk through that, you stay calm, you hear both sides of the story, you try and be objective, and does it get resolved, or is it a complaint? Right? And now, I think we're always I have a hard time saying, broker to broker is a bad idea, because it's not.
That should be the first.
It makes sense. Now, it depends on what's happening, right? It really depends, because there are some scenarios that probably, oh gosh, that seems like this happened, and we can, I get that, that's the sort of the real world application. So try to kind of skate that line of, we know this happens, we know these are the conversations, but at what point do you call it and say, we're going, it's a complaint issue? Now, I will say, I think you raise a great point, Bob, and that section is going to get looked at. I tinkered with it, I rewrote it a little bit, and so it'll get looked at on Friday, with those eyes of like, is that what we wanna do? Do we wanna address that? I can go back and forth on it. If we know it's happening.
Well, a big part of broker responsibility is to be responsible. In both my offices, an agent is not allowed to file a track complaint unless they go through it. That's gotta be the first step, as we go through, and I'm not, independent contractors do what they wanna do, but not in my office. I mean, if that's what they're gonna do, then they'll do it with another broker, because we've gotta be responsible for resolving these problems. Now, if I can't resolve it, and we get to that point, so you know what, I'm sorry. And I've got one right now. The guy's on social media, he's complaining, yelling and screaming, he's gonna file a track complaint, and he will. And so I'll be dealing with that, because we've tried to do everything we can. And we just at that point now, we can't do anything. We take the next step, whatever you're gonna do, and we'll deal with it. And so then we'll go through Mr. Malloy and we'll work through that. I'm really not happy. In fact, I've gotten to know the track investigators really well, so. How that is.
They're so great though.
They are, you know what, they are very good, and they've heard the story. They've been around the park a couple times, and they say, okay, yeah, I've heard that before. And so they're very good at saying, okay, another crazy person, we'll move on from that.
But they don't actually say that.
No, they don't, but they think they.
So let's, it'll be up for approval at the August meeting.
So it'll be implemented and out.
It'll
By next
go
year?
January 1st, I think is the,
When will the training be for the course?
it's usually in between August and January. There's a few train the trainers, there's a lot of them. So those will happen. I'm not sure yet what the structure of those will look like.
So that's how it was.
So this is
Virtual,
Yeah.
it's an upgrade to the current broker responsibility course?
It's
or
an
is it something-
update.
Okay.
So every 2 years, it's updated based on statutory changes, rule changes, legislative stuff. Just like, you do legal one and two 1 year, you do broker responsibility the following year.
Right.
And they kind of stagger in 2 year increments. I might be a little biased, but yes, I would say that it's also an upgrade, not just an update.
Well, I think we are trying to take, this is why we keep mentioning it here too, is we hear what, you know, this group has to say, what ESAC has to say, what folks who email us have to say. And we try and find, you know we can't just implement a bunch more requirements, et cetera. So like what tools do we have? And I think this is an area where we can try and engage people a little bit differently and a little bit more upfront. So this is our attempt at our response to that. And I hope it's successful. I mean, gosh, it could be like, oh, the worst course we've ever seen. I sure hope not. But that's what we've been going in with this mind of like, we hear what we're hearing and where can we get in there. And fortunately, this is one of those areas where Trek is involved, and we've got that development. We got, folks like Chance who've been in these meetings. We've got some folks from ESAC, so we'll see. It's a little bit of an experiment, but I think it's gonna, I think it's covering a lot of what we talk about here, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I think honestly, as we've gone through it several times now, the hardest part has been trying to really allot time to get, 6 hours, fit it in 6 hours from a teaching standpoint.
Yeah.
Because if you really wanted to nerd out on it, you could go 8 hours easy.
Yeah.
But I'm bullish on the content. I think it's good.
6 hours is statutory, though.
Right. So, all right. Now that Chairman Kessner's here, Scott, do you want to say anything? You showed up at the perfect time, right, for us to adjourn, bro.
Yeah, no, we have our monthly joint staff meeting this morning, so sorry I'm late, but no, just listening in, and I agree with Chance. I think Broker Responsibility Working Group and the writing group did a good job. I definitely think it's an upgrade. I think it gives us the opportunity to teach people what they don't know, and then I think it encourages agents to know what their broker should be doing, which I think we'll have a lot of oh me's and a lot of amens during the class when they realize, well, my broker doesn't do that. So I think it'll flow well.
Very good. Well, I got you on the call. I'm just going to go ahead and lobby for our motion that we passed earlier. The language that was written regarding response times that we've talked about before. We changed one word. So the way it was proposed to us, it said in a transaction. We said to a transaction because we were concerned about people arguing that they weren't in a transaction until something was executed.
I would love to lobby with you, but I was told as a commissioner I couldn't lobby. But yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
No issues with you. Y'all are doing good work. You really are. Really are.
All right. Discussion about future agenda items. Mr. Sales.
Thank you. In our brokerage, we encourage our agents to set themselves up as a business. And it's one of the things that we teach and train. And setting themselves up in a business might mean becoming an LLC or forming an LLC. Whether there's a TREC rule with regard to LLC licensees that unless there's a broker with a percentage of ownership, then that LLC must carry E&O insurance. And so I'd like to discuss that rule because as a sponsoring broker, we're already carrying E&O insurance. And so it's a burden for that licensee to become more professional. So it's just a point of discussion I'd like to have. Okay. And if this is the correct context for that.
Clarification on that. If the broker does not have an ownership, then that LLC can be put under the umbrella of the brokerage. Yeah, they don't have to get separate,
That's not the way we're understanding the rules. So.
Well, it's if we've been doing that way for years, and that's what I've read the language in the 4-page process that explains it, that we've got an LLC, the sponsoring broker is a member of the LLC, and we're in no ownership, and we're able to put that under our for the brokerage. In fact, that's what we do. And there's a TREC form to have certification of that E&O that has to be completed and signed off by our E&O carrier. And they sign off on that. That goes in with the paperwork for the LLC. And of course, the LLC has to be sent to the state to get their status there. But we've not had any problem. I mean, our E&O company signs off on it. We put the information for LLC in there, and the language that you have in the paperwork, you know, it does have a situation that if the broker doesn't have any ownership interest, in our cases, we don't have. They just are a member of the LLC, and that's specifically what we're talking about. If they have a different thing, if it's a partnership or S corporation. And so you got that separate form. It wouldn't be any reason to have that separate form, that certification that you know from TREC that we send to our E&O company if that wasn't the case. So if I'm wrong on that, I've got a whole lot of LLCs that are gonna change.
I was told you cannot have an LLC, like, because one of my agents just wanted to have her LLC, and I called and I was told she could not be under my brokerage under an LLC.
They have to do a business entity brokerage.
Yeah.
They have to establish a business entity brokerage. There's a 4-page form. There's a process you have to go
Correct,
through.
but then I would have to be a sponsored broker for that LLC, but it wouldn't be under my current.
You would be the designated broker
Yeah.
for that business entity.
Mhm.
Correct. And so, and by the way, that's a decision a broker has to make. Several of my broker friends said, Bob, if I go to an LLC, then you get a broker's license. I'm not gonna be the designated broker. We
Yeah.
made the decision that we'll be, because we limit what they can do with the LLC.
But they can be under your brokerage with an
Yeah.
LLC.
No,
The
because it's a
sponsoring
different name.
broker is the
Correct.
designated
So I
broker, so
thought
it's a
that's what you were
separate
saying. I thought you were
corporation.
saying that they were under your brokerage with an LLC.
Well, so this is a statutory requirement, everything we're talking about. Is the question, like, do we want to talk about the messaging of it or how it plays out, how it works?
Sounds like
Robin-
there's confusion
Yes.
on the
Right.
requirements
Robin,
for
did you
E&O.
My level of confusion has just gone up
PR
tremendously, so.
So we need to talk
For
about this.
whatever reason, I remember this being in a recent Texas Realtor magazine.
They
Recent
did
email.
have something on it.
I
And,
mean, I drink a bit, but that's what.
yeah, but no, I think you're right. I think it was actually in there.
This is how they explained it.
And you can do that. However, the problem is it opens up so many other liabilities. I mean, honestly, it's just, you're opening up a complete huge can of worms by doing a LLC, and it's just, I've got a friend who did it, and
Chairman
it's
Kessler?
been nothing but trouble, that's all I can tell you. It's just trouble.
Bob's right, the percentage, if I'm not mistaken, is 10%. I think what caused a lot of confusion, there was actually a bill introduced last session, where you could pay an LLC compensation only, that didn't pass, and there was a whole lot of talk about it. And I think that just added to the confusion. Actually, one of our members introduced it, and I think that's what added the confusion, but it does have to, you do have to have a broker, designated broker. Under 10%, you do have to have $1 million E&O if the designated broker owns less than 10%. I believe is the way the rule reads.
It sounds like this may be an opportunity for education and maybe an article or something.
This sounds like a Summer Mandel special.
It does. I was thinking.
That's what this sounds like.
But
That's true.
those that have piped up that have an understanding or a confusion over what the rules are, can we send those to Abby and Vanessa?
For
And
sure.
then that will help us formulate what that
Sure.
clarification needs to be. And then if there is something within those questions that's an agenda item, we can bounce that to you.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
We've got, we'll take basically item 6, we'll provide you with the materials once we've dug them out virtually and wherever they are. And put that as a discussion, possible action to recommend.
By the end, will we have the broker responsibility of the new course? We will. But I think that's an important part of looking at that whole concept, is what's in the new broker responsibility course. It sounds like you're doing a lot of what we would want the sponsoring broker to be able to know and understand. Will we have that by the October meeting? Should have one.
You will.
That's right, it'll be out and available by then, right?
Yes.
Just not yet, yeah.
It will be approved by then, right? It will be approved.
It'll be approved. Yeah, the content will be adopted at the August commission meeting. There are a couple of extra things that we still work on, which is like the PowerPoint that accompanies it, but all of the content and the materials will be available, I would assume in September.
Great.
Good.
And if you, depending on if you're gonna train the trainer, maybe, if it's offered before then. Yes.
That'd be a good one.
Scott, did you have your hand still up or did, no? Okay,
Oh.
there we go. All right, our next meeting is Wednesday, October 12th. Same bat channel, same bat time. Everybody good with that?
Start working on travel.
Start working on travel?
Get with Amber. Actually, that's true. Travel gets more complicated in the fall in Austin.
Why is that?
Festivals.
Yeah,
Oh,
just
that's
all that
football.
stuff.
ACL.
That's
football.
ACL, that's ACL week.
And,
Oh, perfect.
and people
I'll be here
wanna,
early.
people like visiting in the fall. And it just, things get weird.
It's like a big
That's
festival.
Bryce's birthday,
October 4th?
isn't it? No. Oh, why did it just come up?
All right, on that note, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for your time, everybody. Appreciate you. Great stuff. Thank you, guys.
October 12th, yeah.
It's on the agenda if you need.